thank you for everybody for joining me for the next 45 minutes or so. I'm going to be taking some time today to talking about how I've built systems and leveraged outsourcing to help grow my e-commerce business, as well as a number of other things that I've done entrepreneurially. The idea behind this session is I do want to spend about 20 to 25 minutes talking a little bit about what I've done, introduce a model to you guys, but I do want it to be a session where folks are asking questions. I'd really rather help get an idea of what you guys are struggling with and how we might be able to talk about building processes and systems or outsource to help address those problems. So really the presentation is going to be broken down into two broad chunks. The first, we're going to talk a little bit about how we can look at all of the different types of things that we need to do in our business and break them into manageable chunks. Once we have those chunks, then we can build processes and systems around those things to help support our business. Then once we've scoped our work, we'll talk a little bit about how we can leverage outsourcing to drive efficiency and growth in our businesses. So really three quick areas. Start with just a little introduction. So why have I been asked to talk about? I work currently as the finance director for the Cancer Center at Mass General Hospital. I basically oversee a $600 million business in that exercise. I have about 60 different employees that work for me across a number of different functional areas. So to do my job well, I have to be able to delegate. I have to be able to leverage my employees effectively, or it would be impossible for me to do all the things that I need to do to make the Cancer Center run. Outside of that, I also have a number of entrepreneurial exploits. I've been an Amazon seller for the last 3 years, transitioned into eBay as well this year, starting up my own third-party website. I've launched a healthcare company, so there's a lot of different things that I have going on from an entrepreneurial perspective. To juggle all of this stuff on top of my day job, I have to be able to outsource, and I have to have systems in place to help me do all of the things that I want to do and keep my businesses moving in the right direction. So a couple of other things I think that are really important before we get into the meat of the presentation. First thing I want to talk quickly about is your mindset. So I think anybody who has worked on building an e-commerce business can speak to the fact that you're going to have to juggle a lot of things, and your priorities and your attention is going to be pulled in a lot of different directions. At the core of your business, you're going to have things like finding products, managing fulfillment, dealing with things like returns. You're also going to have to deal with things like accounting on the back end. How do I manage customer feedback? You know, you guys all know all of the different things that are involved with running a successful business. And what I found when I was doing a lot of this work was it was really easy for me to get bogged down in the details, and I didn't take a lot of time always to establish the vision behind those things. I think what we all need to do is really take some time and understand what it is that we're trying to do with our respective businesses. For example, like if you picture a slider in your mind, on the left-hand side, there's the option to be an employee. On the right-hand side, there's to have a fully automated, completely hands-off business. That's going to have drastic implications on the systems and the support that you're going to need for your business to function in that way. There is no right answer to that question. You can decide that you want to have your own one-person shop where you run a business and you do everything top to bottom. Or you can say, I don't want to do anything. I just want to sit back and I want to make money. But there's implications to making those decisions. Ultimately, the biggest thing that I've found is until you have clarity around what it is that you want to do, it's going to be really hard for you to build a structure that will support that vision. So you need to take some time and engage in that exercise and figure out what it is that you really want to be in the e-commerce space and what you want to be as an individual. Because if you want to be able to travel, there's flexibilities that are there that are going to require you to maybe move away from things like arbitrage. But we can talk more about that. The idea here is still just to say, where is your head at? And really, what do you want to do in this space? The second thing is I am a big data nerd. I've worked in finance my entire life. Numbers make a lot of sense to me, and I've always been able to do a good job of understanding the story behind the numbers. But what I do want to talk with folks about is why, if you aren't so focused on data, why it's important for you. I think one of the biggest things that I look at whenever I'm growing personally or professionally is how I look to establish goals for myself, right? I think a lot of times people have this balance that they're trying to strike between having dreams, which I think are lofty ambitions, and what I really like to gravitate, especially in business, is towards goals. Goals have specific targets that you can measure against, and data is the thing that's going to allow you to assess your performance. So it's really important. The other thing I think that I want to mention about data specifically is that the choices that you make and how you may want to operate your business are going to have implications on the data that's made available to you. If you decide to just use what Amazon has available to you, you're going to have a lot of analytical power on the back end where you're comfortable using spreadsheets to derive things like profit margin, what's your leading seller, all of the other metrics I think that are really important at the end of the day. But know that the choices that you're making when you're choosing solution providers is going to have a significant impact on the data that's readily available to you. And you want to make sure that you have the right types of data to support the things that you want to do in your business. So as you're exploring different vendors to support your business, you want to get a good flavor for what are some of the analytics that they're also going to give you on the back end, not just the services that they're going to offer to you. So what's my approach to outsourcing and building processes? I work in the healthcare world. We have a lot of different acronyms, so I came up with my own in this space as well. So it's called DOMIR, but basically the gist of it is that I go through this 5-step process whenever I'm trying to approach any chunk of business. And as we go through the rest of this presentation, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how we can actually apply this process. One is going to be sort of on the product sourcing and acquisition front, and the second bit is going to be about how we might want to fulfill some of our products and ultimately manage either the interface with customers or with a platform like Amazon FBA. So it starts with you're delineating, then you're going to move to outsourcing, you're going to monitor some stuff, you're going to iterate, and then you're just going to repeat this over and over again. The other point that I do want to make here is some of the folks in this room might be on the fence about outsourcing in general. There's nothing wrong with that. You can still engage in this process and get a lot of clarity about how you might want to approach your business a little differently. At the end of the day, I think what does become important is that as you go through this whole exercise that you're flexible with yourself and you understand that I'm providing you a framework, the application of that framework might not be exactly the same for your business the way it's worked in my business. So let's go through the steps a little bit. So the first one is delineating. So I think before you can start to craft any type of an exercise or before you can really break down any workflows for anyone else, you need to really understand what it is that you're doing in a particular area. The way that I kind of do this myself is I sort of describe it as like I'm starting with bread and I'm going down to breadcrumbs, right? And the idea is that I want to take a very broad area, like let's say product acquisition, right? And that's really just buying products. But then you start to go through the steps very systematically, and you're going to say, okay, well, if I want to buy a product, what are the places that I'm going to look for? What are going to be the parameters around that product? Maybe I'm looking at things like sales rank, profit margin, availability of that product, how quickly I can get access to that product. And you kind of just keep doing this exercise, and you get as granular as possible. And what you're really trying to do here is develop a step-by-step process that you could share with someone else, and they could, maybe not to the same degree as you read at the beginning, but at least generally mirror your approach to doing something. Once you have a good understanding of what it is that you're trying to do, then you kind of want to think about what's your special sauce. All of us have different ways that we're going to be approaching our business. Maybe you're a very high turnover, low margin type of shop, and you really just want to get product in and out. You're happy with things that are moving very quickly, and you maybe don't need to have as much focus on how much money I'm going to make on every individual unit. It's the aggregate sum of all of those units that's really going to drive your profitability. A lot of people in wholesale have this type of a business model. Contrast that with the person who is really looking to get a lot of money out of every single item that they sell. These people might be more eBay focused and finding a lot of their products at places like yard sales or at thrift stores. Again, there's no absolute right answer to this, but I do think what you need to think about as you frame all of these exercises is what's your special sauce and what are you going to think about that's unique to the way that you approach your business that if you were to ask somebody else to do it, or if you were to try to do it better yourself, makes you different than everybody else. The biggest part about this step, and the most important part about this step, is the last item on this slide, which is you're really going to determine how comprehensive your approach is through testing. I like to do this through basically introducing this to people who aren't familiar with our space at all. In my world, I call that the grandma test, right? So go to my grandmother, doesn't know anything about anything to do with e-commerce sales. But I sit down with her, and when I really want to introduce a new process, if she can follow it step by step to completion, in all likelihood, I can teach somebody else how to do that. The other really important part about this step is when you're interfacing with someone who has no context about a particular topic, they're going to ask questions that to you might seem like common sense. And what that becomes is an opportunity for you to go back in and revisit those steps that you've built to say, oh, I forgot to mention this item or that item. And once you've included all of those things, now you really have a full, robust, very detailed understanding of what exactly it is that you're going to need to do in a particular area. The other thing that I'm going to mention quickly about delineating exercises is I also think about whenever I'm doing work in my business, the different hats that I need to put on. You know, if you are a one-person shop, in a way, you're still fulfilling a number of different roles in the process, right? And in this exercise, really what I want people to be doing is you're trying to serve more as a visionary. You're approaching this from a strategic perspective. A lot of times when you're doing something, it's hard to understand what you might be doing wrong, where might be the areas for improvement, because you're so focused on the task itself. And especially when you're doing something yourself, I think we all have this tendency to say, well, I'm doing things the right way, right? So being open to the fact that I can revisit a process more objectively and just think about how things should be done, I think creates a lot of opportunities for you to potentially improve how things will work in your business going forward in the future. Second step, outsourcing. So we understand the work that we need to do. Now we're going to think a little bit about how we might leverage outsourcing as a way to help us drive performance in our business. I find when it comes to outsourcing, I'm generally facing two different choices. The first choice is I'm going to train somebody to do this myself, and they're going to be a member of my team. In those circumstances, I'm taking ownership over every step of that process. And I'm going to have to also be the person on the back end who is monitoring and making sure that they're doing all of those things the same way that I would do them. The second option, generally speaking, in our space is you can pay someone for a service that'll manage a lot of things. I don't think that in every case you should be having expertise in-house, or in every case you should be outsourcing all of the functions of your business. I also don't think that those things are constants. You could ultimately start by outsourcing everything to somebody else and ultimately decide that you want to build all of those things in-house. The most important part about the whole thing, though, is remembering that you are still going to be involved in these processes in the long term, even if I'm trying to outsource them, because management and oversight is critical to doing outsourcing well. At the end of the day, even though I may have a third-party warehouse to manage my shipping, or a third-party solution supplier to manage my feedback and deal with my reconciliations of my items, I should be doing something to look over their work and make sure that it's happening the same way it would if I was doing it myself. And if it's not, what's the feedback mechanism that I can actually get some improvement either from the employees that I have myself or the service that I'm working with? Third step, monitoring. I think this is really critical to doing any type of outsourcing really well. Knowledge is power, and I think as you start to implement changes in the way your business is being run, you're going to notice that there's going to be changes in the performance of your business. In this regard, I think one of the really important things is understanding the goals that are specific to a task, right? So we're going to go back to the two examples that I had talked about that we're going to flesh out a little bit at the beginning of our talk. So the first is product sourcing, right? If I hire a VA, I'm going to want to know things like, How many items on average are they finding for me a day? How many items am I getting over the course of the week? How many of those things am I actually buying for my business versus things that are garbage? How many of those things am I buying that ultimately become replens for me in the long term? How much am I paying my VA versus how much money am I getting on the back end from profit with working with this person? There's a number of different parameters around all of these different things, and it's important to understand them. If you think about the packing side of the equation or fulfillment, how many units per hour is someone able to process, right? Are the things that they're sending out, am I getting a higher rate of returns, AKA is there some issue with their quality control side of things? All of these situations I think will play out, and until you understand what you need to measure people against, it's difficult to understand what types of solution providers you need that'll help you monitor those things, and it's difficult for you to figure out what are the types of things that I need to be looking at. I think the other big important thing that then happens is after you've sort of figured out what it is that you want people to do, you've established some targets for them, it's really important that you start to understand how the changes that you make in the way that you work will change the data that you receive on the back end. A lot of times the things that we do have implications, and it's hard for us to understand them. So it's not to say that everything is going to have a one-to-one relationship, but a number that I'm always looking at in my business, for example, is how much money do I make per hour on average? So I'm ballparking how many hours a week I'm committing to my business, tally those up at the end of the month, and I divide that by the total amount of profit that I get. If that number is trending up, things are going well in my business, in my opinion, right? The other thing that I look at in general is the amount of time that I'm investing in my business, because as I think about my mindset to the e-commerce space, I'm really trying to gravitate further to the right of that example I talked about at the beginning, where I'm not spending a lot of time working in my business. I want to really build something that can work without me. And that's my primary goal in doing all of this outsourcing and process building, is that I really would like to remove myself from the business entirely and continue to see it do as well as it does today without me spending any time in it. We'll see if I can get there, but that's the dream, right? The last thing that I'm going to mention on monitoring is that I think that a lot of times people have difficulty becoming comfortable with numbers if it's not your forte, right? And that's fine, but I think what you have to do with anything like this is start someplace. Just pick one or two things. Start to track them. See if you can create relationships between the things that you guys are doing and changing the way that you work and how those data things may change. And if it works for you, that's great. That will in turn make you more inclined to say what other elements of data that I haven't really been looking at as closely as I might have been that I want to start looking at now. So we figured out what we want to do. We figured out the right way to sort of deploy resources. We've been tracking stuff. Now is our time to tinker and to tweak. If you're the type of person who's wondered, does it make more sense to take all of the stickers off every item first before I end up doing any of the other parts of prep? This is when you can test those types of things. Should someone, if you have retail shoppers, should they come into a store and go to clearance first, or do they go and hit their replens first? There's a lot of different options, but the most important point here is that you need to always be on the lookout for a better mousetrap. There's going to be always a different way to approach your business. You need to figure out, one, what exactly you want to do in your business, and two, are the things that you've put in place the things that are actually going to support getting you there. If you find that there's something that you want to try, test it. If it works, and the data indicates that it works, keep doing it. If it doesn't, that's fine. Learn from it, move on to the next thing. But if you don't understand how those little variations in the way you do things are going to result in changes in your performance, you're never going to find yourself being as efficient as you possibly could be in the work that you're trying to do. And then the last step here is really repeating this over and over and over again. You can start by saying, maybe I started with sourcing, now I'm going to move on to packing. Then I'm gonna shift to listing development. Also, you can go back and you can say, I did packing, I did 10 other things. I'm gonna go back and revisit my packing exercise from top to bottom. The reason that we wanna make sure that we're repeating and revisiting things is our business changes constantly. As you grow, you're gonna have different pressures. If you decide that you start in an arbitrage world and you move to a wholesale private label world, that's gonna have implications on the ways that you wanna do things. And if you don't go back and tweak the old processes that you have, they're not gonna be the right things to ultimately support your business in the long term. You wanna build those goals and those processes to design an experience that's tailored to your specific approach to your business right now. A couple of other things just to mention here. So the first thing is iterate. I know I just mentioned this, but iterate, then iterate again. You really need to experiment a lot with things. I have found myself that seemingly small changes that I've made in processes across my team have led to significantly higher levels of output. Things that I would never have thought to even try, I've been able to test and say work or won't work. But if I didn't sort of have this spirit of continuous improvement and wasn't always focused on iterating, I don't think that I would necessarily continue to see the benefits out of this type of work. Monitoring, continuous monitoring is really important. I've been a victim of this myself. A lot of times I'll put some things in place. They'll start working well. I'll look at the numbers. The numbers indicate that everything is going smoothly. And then I'll stop looking at the numbers. And then something will start to go wrong. And I won't notice until I'm basically behind the 8 ball. If you don't continue to look at your metrics, you're gonna find yourself at a disadvantage in the business space. It's really as simple as that. And the last thing is to be really patient and flexible with yourself. I mean, if you haven't done this type of work before, and I've done it for about a decade, I still get incredibly frustrated at times. You know, it's difficult to teach someone else how to do something that you can do really well. It's difficult to face a setback in something that you thought would have worked so well and still be able to come back and approach that situation objectively and try and figure out a new path forward to sort of the end game. You know, realize that you're going to have those setbacks. Realize that everything's not going to work the first time. It's okay. Just stay focused, keep moving forward, and tweak the approach based on the stuff that you need. So a few closing thoughts, then I'm going to have some questions for folks. Again, it all starts with mindset for me. I think that you need to figure out where it is that you're trying to go before you can figure out all the tools and the things that are going to get you there. Data is, I'm a big proponent of data, as you guys all know by now. Understanding your data is essential to your success. You got to develop specific goals and specific targets. As far as this approach goes, like I said, it's a framework. If it works for you, that's terrific. If pieces of it work for you, that's great. If none of it works for you, that's fine too. Like, the whole idea here is, like you're gonna tinker in your business, you're gonna get a lot of information thrown at you at a conference like this. You should take a few of those things, test them, implement them. If they work, that's fantastic. If they don't, you move on to the next thing. A couple of other things real quick. As I mentioned, I do have a few entrepreneurial endeavors in play. A couple of things sort of specific to the e-commerce space. I right now am one of the founders of a Facebook group called Outsourcing Simplifiers. We run an Amazon to Amazon flip group. Find things on Amazon, you buy them, you can sell them on Amazon. All the information is sort of there, but if you're interested, certainly come and join us. I've also just recently started a prep and pack company along with my own warehouse. We're calling it Shipple Prep. It's not a misspelling. The 3 Ps are a play on 3PL. But I think the biggest difference, in that market is I partnered with a couple of folks from Harvard, as well as a logistics expert. So we've got a lot of really talented people who are helping to lead this business. My experiment in particular with this business is I want to figure out how to maximize throughput in a way that, at least, I'm not sure is possible at this point in time, but I know for myself, until my stuff gets into the Amazon warehouse or is listed live on eBay or on my own third-party website, I'm not making any money. So I need to figure out how to really limit any of that turnover time, and that's going to really be the experiment that sort of this business is going to be built upon. So with that, I'll open up the floor to some questions. So thank you for your time.
Okay, any questions? Hold on one second.
They're all looking at me like, what is this guy going to ask? Actually, I'm kind of curious on, you talked about metrics and those type of things. What are some metrics you look at to make sure things don't fall through the cracks?
Sure. So for me, I think a lot of it starts with goal setting, right? So every year, what I try to do is I try to establish an annual sales goal across all of my different channels, and then what are the sales goals interior to each of those channels, right? So let's say, for example, I want to sell $1 million on Amazon. I know my average selling price is $25 per unit. That means I have to sell about 40,000 items to hit that figure, right? I can take that 40,000 items, I can break that down into a certain number of items that I have to deal with every month. That in turn tells me I know I have to buy this many things, I have to process this many things, and that's really going to help me sort of move towards my targets. The other thing that I spend time looking at is my dollars per hour out of my business, right? I look at this probably twice a week at minimum, but I'm constantly looking, because I'm investing in all of these things in terms of adding new solutions or adding. As I do those things, I still want to make sure that I'm making more money, not less money out of my business. So I think those are really the two big ones that I tend to be looking at the most frequently.
Okay, so if you were going to hire a new employee today to learn everything, that's listing, sourcing, everything but kind of like repricing, dealing with customers, stuff like that, where would you start them? Do you think it's better if they list products and see, ranks and what I'm already buying, or take them to the store, let them scan some stuff, watch you? Like, where would you start to get someone to replace you when it comes to sourcing and listing and prep?
So if I were to start someone on sourcing, listing, and prep, I think the first thing that I want to do is generally just walk them through the way the business works, right? So that starts to me outside of the store, off the website. It's really just them sitting down, having a conversation with me. And typically I'm going to do this by reviewing things that have done well for me or done very poorly for me, right? I find, especially in the listing and sourcing space, it's important that people understand the thought process that went into my buys. And additionally, the thought process that happened after I found out that something worked poorly or worked well. Once I've kind of introduced them to the concept, I think now we take this on the road show, right? And when I do that, I tend to find that there's a big importance that I place on having people have some wins. So I'd like to give folks a list of proven wins that I have that are currently working in my business so they can go in. And the idea here is more that they're getting the process. They learn how to scan the items. Maybe they're looking at the Keep a chart. They're taking the time to understand the things that they need to do with something that I know will already work for my business. And then from there, I'm going to parlay them and say, okay, maybe you go and you work on this different section, or you go into the clearance zone, right? The other big thing that I like to do when I'm building any type of listing or sourcing type of workforce is I want people to have specialties, right? If you look at a lot of the larger corporate e-commerce firms, they have these things called category managers. I haven't quite gone to that extreme, but I do want people who are more familiar with baby goods and toys, and then someone else who might be more familiar with clothing and shoes. I find the more that people can gravitate towards a particular area, they're going to find the right channels, whether that be stores or websites, to find those things. They're going to become familiar with sales cycles. They're going to be familiar with the brands that are important in that space. They're going to be familiar with shortages that exist. And all of those things, I think, ultimately translate into profits for my business.
Anybody else? Nope. Okay, thanks, Assad.
All right. Thank you, everybody.